Hi, my name's Maddie Gasson and welcome to True Crime Corner. On this week's episode, we're going to be exploring the case of Fred and Rose West. Frederick Walter Stephen West was a British serial killer who committed 12 murders. The majority of these murders were with his second wife, Rosemary West, and the victims consisted of young women. At least 8 of the murders involved their sexual gratification. This included bondage, rape, torture, and mutilation. He and Rose were jointly charged with 9 murders and he with 3 more. Rose was convicted of 10 murders and sentenced to 10 life terms and a whole life order. Fred was one of 6 children and was his mother's favourite, and from a very young age he pestered women and objectified them, and he saw them as sources of pleasure. In June 1961, Fred's 13-year-old sister told their mother that Fred had been raping her and impregnated her, and he admitted to the police he had been molesting young girls and said, "Doesn't everyone do it?" He was tried 9th of November, but his sister refused to testify and the case collapsed, and Fred's household disowned him and his mother banished him. By mid-1962, he reconciled with his parents. Fred's first wife was Catherine Costello, who he met at the Marseille dance in 1960, and Costello was pregnant by an Asian bus driver at the time of her marriage to Fred. To explain the child's mixed ancestry, they claimed she suffered a miscarriage and that Charmaine, their daughter, was adopted. In July 1964, Catherine bore Fred a daughter, Anna Marie. Fred treated their children harshly and kept the girls in the bottom of the bunk bed with bars fitted between the bunks, and they were only allowed out for work. Fred also admitted to numerous affairs and fathered one illegitimate child. His wife Catherine found out and she started an affair. When Catherine found out about Fred's numerous affairs, she pursued an affair in herself, and on one occasion Fred came home. This ended up in an altercation between the man she was having an affair with and her husband. From early 1966, Fred exhibited dominance and control over these 3 women, and Fred began sexually abusing Charmaine and encouraged Catherine to turn to prostitution. Catherine devised a plan with the man that she was having an affair with, which led to an altercation, and the police were called and Catherine left without the children, and Fred said that he would kill her if he ever saw her again. Fred met his second wife, Rosemary Letts, in the early 1969 after her 15th birthday. She refused a date with him twice but let him accompany her home, and after that he persuaded her with a gift to let him on a date. Shortly after they started their relationship, she became a childminder to his children, and Rose's parents forbade their daughter from dating Fred, but she still continued to do so. Her parents called social services and told them that she was engaging in prostitution and was placed in a troubled home for teens in August 1969. On her 16th birthday, she returned home to her parents, but shortly after, in February 1970, it was confirmed that she was pregnant. Rose was placed into care but was discharged on the understanding she would terminate the baby, but she opted to live with Fred, and on the 17th of October 1970, Rose gave birth to their daughter Heather Ann. She later gave birth to their second daughter, May June. Rose began work as a prostitute after their second child and engaged in sexual acts with both men and women. By 1977, Rose's father began to tolerate their marriage. By 1977, Rose's father had begun to tolerate their marriage, and by 1983, Rose had birthed 8 children and Fred claimed them all as his own, and Rose's dad would also visit to have sex with his daughter. All of the West children were domestically abused and at age 7 were assigned numerous roles of daily chores. Rosemary West is believed to have killed Charmaine before Fred's release date, and Charmaine's body was stowed in the coal cellar of a Midland road. Fred later buried her naked body in the yard, close to the back door, and Catherine was believed to have been murdered by strangulation. Fred and Rose West committed numerous sexual assaults. On September 1972, the Wests forced Anna Marie, their child, to undress, and she was bound to the mattress and gagged, and Fred raped her. Rose occasionally sexually abused Anna Marie. At age 13, they forced her to become a prostitute, and they told clients that she was 16, and Rosemary West would sit in to make sure she didn't reveal her true age. On September 1972, the Wests hired 17-year-old Carolyn Owens to be their nanny. They lured her into their vehicle and Rose fondled her, but she protested. They performed sexual acts on her and they had given her a drugged cup of tea beforehand. The following morning she woke up restrained, and Fred threatened to kill her if she told anyone. He claimed to kill hundreds of girls and then asked if she would continue as a nanny work, because he wouldn't let her go. So she agreed to be their nanny, but soon found her escape, and she later escaped from a laundrette. There were countless instances of abuse in the West home. Heather and May West became the focus of Fred's incestuous attentions after Anna Marie ran away from home in 1979, and the frequency of the abuse increased when they both reached puberty. He had intentions to impregnate both of his daughters, and he also occasionally forced all of his children to watch porn with him. Heather, May and their younger brother Stephen were very close, and they all formed a trio to protect each other from Fred. But Stephen said to his father that he would like to have sex with his mother at the age of 16, and he was evicted at age 16. The first murder took place in July 1967 with Anne McFall, who was 18. Her remains were found on the 7th of June 1994 in Fingerpost Field. Her body had been placed in a rectangular pit and covered with loose topsoil. The second accounted murder was the 6th of January 1968. Mary Basfalm, who was 15, she was a teen waitress at a cafe that Fred visited a lot, and she was abducted from a bus stop on a Bristol road. The second murder was on the 20th of June 1971, Charmaine West, who was 8. Charmaine was killed by Rose, and her remains were stored in the cellar at Midland Road before Fred buried her body near the end of the garden. In August 1971, Catherine Costello, 27, was murdered. It is believed that Fred killed her to avoid any form of investigation about Charmaine. She is believed to be strangled before Fred extensively mutilated her body and buried her in Letterbox Field. 20th of April 1973 was their first sexually motivated killing. Her name was Linda Go, and she was 19. She was a lodger at 25 Cromwell Street, and she had shared sexual partners with Rose. Her mother called Cromwell Street to inquire her daughter's whereabouts to find Rose wearing her daughter's clothes. Her remains were buried in an inspection pit under the garage. On the 10th of November 1973, Carol Ann Cooper, who was 15, was murdered. She was last seen alive by her boyfriend, and her skull was bound with surgical tape and her dismembered limbs bound with cord and braiding cloth. On the 27th of December 1973, Lucy Parrington, who was 21, was abducted from the bus stop along the A435, and her body was found in the Cromwell Street cellar on the 6th of March 1994. On the 15th of November 1974, Shirley Hubbard, 15, was murdered. Her dismembered remains were found in a section known to the family as the Marilyn Monroe area. Her head had been completely covered in tape with 1/8 of an inch diameter inserted into her nasal cavity to enable her to breathe. On the 10th of May 1978, Shirley Robinson, 18, had been bisexual and engaged in acts with both of the Wests. She was 8 months pregnant with their child before they disappeared. Her baby boy was born June 11th. She was murdered as her pregnancy threatened the West relationship, and they had originally planned to sell their baby. On the 5th of August 1979, Alison Chambers, 16, had become acquainted with the West in 1979, and Fred claimed Chambers died on the result of Rose becoming too vicious with her. Her dismembered body had missing bones and a leather belt looped beneath her jaw and was buried in the bottom of the garden at Cromwell Street. And finally, in the 19th of June 1987, they killed their daughter Heather West. Fred claimed not to intend on killing her, but carpet fire found lengths of rope discovered her remains and suggested that she was restrained and subjected to sexual acts. She was dismembered and buried in a hole in the garden which Fred made their son dig. On the 24th of January 1994, Fred was apprehended. He and Rose were jointly charged with 9 murders and he with 3 more, and Rose was convicted of 10 murders and sentenced to 10 life terms and a whole life order. However, on January 1st, 1995, Fred West asphyxiated himself in his cell by making an improvised rope around his neck. Thank you for joining us on this week's episode, and be sure to tune in for next week's episode of True Crime Corner.